Hello, everyone, and welcome to Move Daily Talks. I'm your host, Tracy Steen, and today I welcome Dr. Allan Bacon onto our show. This is going to be a good conversation. Allan is also a certified personal trainer and works with a lot of people, works with a lot of women, especially those who maybe have reached a plateau in their fitness, in their wellness, in their nutrition. So, we're going to talk about some of those ways to break through a plateau today. We're also going to be looking at supplements. This can be a really broad topic, but it can also be one that can help us attain our fitness goals. So we'll dive deep into that today as well. Dr. Allan Bacon holds a doctorate in dental surgery from the University of Maryland. He's a certified personal trainer through the National Academy of Sports Medicine, a certified nutritionist and physique bodybuilding coach, a certified coach for USA Powerlifting, and has formulated professionally for industry-leading dietary supplement companies for over 15 years. You can find Allan's written works in Muscle and Fitness, SciFit, the Allan Aragon Research Review, the Personal Trainer Development Center, and more. His practice focuses on helping working adults master their physique, performance, mindset, and habits for lifelong sustainable results. And this is what we are all about here at Move Daily Fitness, which is why I wanted to have Dr. Allan on. Would you welcome with me to the podcast, Dr. Allan Bacon? So we are here with Dr. Allan Bacon. Really excited to dive into these topics today. Again, looking at supplements, and there are just so many questions. I often get asked which supplements I use, which supplements should we have? Do we need to be on supplements? So we're going to start the conversation there today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate the invite. It's always good to get to talk to somebody that knows what they're doing and bounce ideas off each other.
It really is. And, with your knowledge and background, especially in this supplement world, I would love to pick your brain to start off with just if you think about who our audience is. So we are basically that middle-aged person. There are some men that listen to our podcast, but it's predominantly female, right?
Sure.
So it's the woman who really is looking to maximize this time in her life to get fit, to dial in fitness, wellness, and nutrition. And of course, when we look at social media, we see a lot of people taking supplements, right? There's lots of push, there's lots of jargon and talk about different supplements. And so sometimes we think, oh, I should be on that. She's on that. That's working for her. Look what she's doing. I
hmm
should do that. So when you're thinking about supplements and an individual, what's the thought process for you in terms of how you would recommend a supplement for a client of yours?
There are three big ones that I would start with as the basis for pretty much everybody. And then everything else kind of branches off into what does an individual person need? Because
Right.
obviously trying to give, an entire pharmacy's worth of supplements to every individual person probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? And so I think starting with base supplements to help improve someone's life, help improve their performance, help improve everything going on with the quality of their life is an important thing. And the three that I would start with would be a protein powder of some kind, creatine, and fish oil. Not groundbreaking. It's the type of thing that everybody talks about, but there's a reason that people talk about it.
Right.
And people talk about it because it does tend to become so important. And there's a lot of nuance that maybe you haven't heard of among these things that can really benefit you. For
Okay.
instance, when we
Yeah.
talk about the fact that if a large proportion of listeners are middle-aged and maybe older females, one of the big issues that we find is particularly with the aging process, and this is irrespective of gender, protein utilization becomes a real problem. And so we need to get in adequate amounts of protein, and believe it or not, protein needs probably increase as we age. And this is unrelated to menopause. It's unrelated to the hormone shifts that we have, but it's something that's really important to take into account. And certainly getting enough protein in can be a very challenging thing. And so protein supplementation can be a really important thing. And this can be a very confusing field for a lot of people because shit, there are so many options out there. Like, what are you supposed to do? Whey protein concentrate, casein, isolate, soy protein, all of these different things can be confusing. And so it helps to understand that For the majority of these proteins, you can interchange them and you'll get very good results. Whey protein concentrate, whey protein isolate, even soy protein that a lot of people fear with phytoestrogens, which doesn't appear to be a problem outside of very specific situations. All of these things can be very beneficial. The two that I would recommend potentially avoiding as supplements to hit your protein minimums that you're trying to target on a daily basis are beef protein isolate and collagen. And
Right.
this can be confusing for many people because on a label, it says protein, and you think, hey, protein's protein. Unfortunately, when it comes to protein, protein isn't necessarily protein. There's a very large difference in the quality of what is offered by some of these products.
Yes, I
And
did a little study on collagen not too long ago, and what I found there too is that it is really low in the amino acid leucine
mhm.
compared to a whey protein. So could you talk to us a little bit about what exactly we want to be looking for within our protein supplement?
A whole complement of proteins is preferential, and it's not that collagen does not come with a complement. I mean, it's short on tryptophan, but the issue that you brought up is the very real reason why I would probably not count it towards my protein minimums. It is very deficient in leucine, and it's very heavy in proline and glycine. So you're missing out on some of the main amino acids that are necessary to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And if one of the big issues that we find, particularly in the aging population, is sarcopenia, osteoporosis, getting the proper amounts of protein in is going to be imperative to be able to stave off some of these problems. And so if we're using things like collagen or beef protein isolate to substitute in place of our protein, we're going to have a bad time. It's going to give us some bad results. And collagen can somewhat be understandable by many people because what you brought up with the idea of understanding the amino acid spectrum out there is semi-common knowledge. Beef protein isolate is the one that confuses people even more. And the reason that beef protein isolate confuses people more is because when you hear beef protein, it sounds like it's a very good source of protein, right? The problem with beef protein isolate is it's not meat. It's connective tissue and blood product. And
Mm,
so the amino acid spectrum of a beef protein isolate is almost identical to gelatin or collagen rather than actual beef meat. And so this becomes a selling point for supplement manufacturers. Because what they'll do is they'll say, hey, look, if we put beef protein isolate on the product, people will think it's this high quality source of protein. It costs basically nothing because it's the throwaway parts of
gross.
the beef process. And I'm not trying to make people, scared of different throwaway parts because the reality is that's what whey once was. But whey is a very high quality source. The problem with beef protein isolate is it's a throwaway product and it's not a high quality source. But
Right.
people love it because they point out two things. They say, hey, this is very easy to digest. And yes, it is because it's basically the same ingredients that are in Jello. And there's a reason that we give people Jello when they're in the hospital. And then they say it's very easy to flavor. Yes, Jello is very easy to flavor. So these beef protein isolates, from a consumer perspective, seem like they could be a superior choice because they have the same protein number on the label. They taste great. They're very easily digested. And that sounds all wonderful on paper. What people don't realize is that protein number that is listed when we see them in a nutrition panel, that is not looking at quality whole intact protein. What it's doing is it is a measurement of something called nitrogenous species. And any amino acid will show up as protein on a protein label legally, according to the FDA. And so, in theory, if I was a shady supplement company
Mm,
and I thought, you know what? Whey is a little bit expensive for me in this market, and I want to have a higher return on my product that I sell. Maybe what I do is I put in glycine or proline or arginine, or I put in creatine, and then I can tell people that this product has creatine in it. And at the same time, if I put in 5 grams of creatine, I can market it as it having creatine, which is a good thing. And then those 5 grams of creatine also count as protein on the protein label, even
okay.
though it's creatine. And so they will,
Tricksters.
they will yeah, they'll do this. It's called or it's called amino spiking.
Okay.
And so this is something that on a protein label, people have to be conscious of. And it's something that not many people are conscious of. And to make sure that you're not getting taken for a ride when you're buying a protein supplement, it's very important to understand that this is in existence, and unfortunately, it's a pretty common thing to find. And so, how do you identify this? The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to look at the ingredients label that's underneath the nutrition information. So, where you see the protein, carbs, fats, look below that, and it'll say ingredients or other ingredients. When you look at that, what you want to see as the first couple ingredients are some high quality protein source: whey protein isolate, whey protein concentrate, soy protein isolate, casein. These are all great. If in the following options in the ingredients, you see individual amino acids, there's a rather high chance that you have an amino spiked product. It's probably best to look for something else.
Okay, that is a good tip. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Yeah. I actually have not even ever tried the beef protein. Is it a isolate, that beef
It says
protein?
beef protein isolate on it.
Yeah.
Any powdered product that says that it's beef protein is going to be using beef protein isolate. I am unaware of a product on the market that is marketed as a beef protein supplement that uses anything other than the beef protein isolate that is
Right.
the connective tissue and blood product. Now, theoretically, there could be. You could make a protein powder out of actual meat. The problem is you're then going to be paying like $150 per tub.
Right.
And so I have not seen it on the market. If anybody knows of one, certainly send me one. I'm happy to take a look.
And then we're drinking a beef shake, which sounds absolutely disgusting. So no, thank you. I'm going to pass on a
Yeah,
whole beef world. Okay, so that's great. So let's look a little bit deeper into protein supplements then. Uh, I read once within, maybe it was in Consumer Reports or within the Clean Label Project, they had some older reviews. I don't think they're super current anymore, but they had a review of hundreds of different protein powders. And the ones that seem to come up higher in um, heavy metals
mm,
were the ones that were the vegan or vegetarian. And in the explanation there was because the animal is a filter for these metals, heavy metals, and then it produces the milk and we produce the whey protein. But for the vegetarian proteins, you tend to have some levels that are a little bit higher. What do you think about this? Is this true? And should we be wary about vegetarian or vegan protein powders?
it's possible to have slightly higher levels in the vegan products. It's not something that I would really fearmonger or tell people you need to be really worried about. I would be more worried based off of the quality of each individual company because this is typically an isolation issue. If you're finding large amounts of heavy metals in your products, it's typically a quality control issue with the company themselves or
That's
who
right.
they are using as a manufacturer. Because the reality is there are two or three major companies that manufacture most of the supplements for almost every company out there.
Hmm.
And so very few companies actually take it upon themselves to do it. I mean, Glanbia is one of them that does a lot of the major sourcing for people. Now they don't do vegan as much. They have a major dairy producer, and so they're the ones behind Optimum Nutrition. That is pretty common, but that Optimum Nutrition type of protein is seen in probably 40 or 50% of the proteins out there. So is this something to really worry about? In that study that you're referencing, or in that review that you're referencing, I
Mhm.
remember that a lot of the muscle milk products in particular
Yeah, that's
triggered
right.
pretty high
They
in that.
were.
And they had since turned their quality control around because of that
Oh,
review.
that's good.
And so, yeah, I still don't buy from them, but if you're buying from them now, don't freak out over those results. But to your point, yeah, I think that there's the potential for more. Whether or not that's actually in play is dependent on the manufacturer and their quality control procedures. And if you're concerned, I would recommend sending an email to whoever you're buying your protein powders from and request third-party, verification of purity, and hopefully they'll be able to provide that for you.
That's a great tip as well. Um, I find that people who are new to fitness and nutrition and they want to turn their health around, so often that will be their first question. What supplement should I use? And my thought is always, let's just get the whole foods dialed in first. Like, let's just
100%.
look, right? Let's look at
Yeah.
getting quality whole protein, fiber, healthy fats. But a lot of people just, I think they have this mindset that when you go into fitness, that's what you have to do. Of course, if you could get your adequate amounts from nutrition, more power to you. Let's
Mhm.
eat all of our protein amounts. The problem is, as our appetites begin to decline with age, we really have to maximize everything that's on our plate, right?
Mhm.
And if we have protein targets, for me, it's around that 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So I'm aiming for at least 100 grams a day. That's a challenge. It's a challenge to eat that amount. So having a supplement can be really helpful with that. What do you think about who needs to be on a supplement or who would benefit from a protein supplement?
I mean, just like you said, anybody that has problems meeting their needs through real
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
And this is not just because we're talking about supplements doesn't mean that protein in particular doesn't mean that um, that we believe that you have to have a protein supplement. If you can get something from Whole Foods, it meets your protein requirements, it sticks within your calorie goals for a day, certainly get it from Whole Foods. It'll provide more benefits. I mean, there's nutrients that you don't get from protein powders. I mean, there's zoonutrients, there are cofactors and phytonutrients if you're taking a vegan source of protein powder that you get from the actual foods rather than the protein powder itself. So if you have the ability to get it from foods, certainly do that. However, I would still, even if you're getting it from foods, keep one of these on hand. And
Hmm.
I would keep one of these on hand because life gets busy, right? And there are certain situations in which we can use them strategically to our benefit. And maybe that makes a healthy lifestyle more sustainable for us.
Yeah.
For instance, life gets busy. Okay, well, I can't eat a full meal right now. Maybe I didn't prep as well as I should have. I'll beat myself up over that later. But for right now, I can get a little bit of a protein powder in, stay largely on track, fight off hunger, and move on with my life and feel a little bit better about it. Or in my favorite situation, maybe you are going out to spend some time with friends. You have a healthy lifestyle that you value quite a bit, and maybe they're a little bit different. Maybe you're going out to watch football at a bar on a Sunday or something like that, and you want to have a time with them where you spend the time, enjoying their company, but you don't necessarily want to be thrown off from your healthy lifestyle as much. Well, having something like a protein powder before you go can act as a protein source for that period when you're gone. It can take up a little bit of room in your stomach, so maybe you're not emotionally eating as much or drinking as much in the situation. And maybe you can use the same type of strategy when you're going out to dinner with friends, or maybe they just want to go out for drinks or whatever it is, but you can use this strategically, even though it may not be a mainstay in your everyday diet, it can give you benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to use BCAAs all of the time for years and years and years and years. That was the
Uh-oh.
thing I drank during my workouts because that's what I was told. And
Sure.
then I remember I interviewed Dr. Stuart Phillips, and he said that drinking BCAAs is sometimes like being in a pool and then splashing water on your face. It's
Yep.
a little bit overkill. So, is there any place for branched chain amino acids in the form of a supplement? Or are we to look for the branched chain amino acids from our foods predominantly?
You're going to want to look for this from your foods predominantly. That doesn't mean that there isn't a place for amino acid supplementation. And Stu and I are good friends, so this is a funny, nuanced conversation that we
Oh,
can get
that's good.
into.
Yeah.
Um, there's I was in a big conversation about this morning with another coach, and they were asking questions about this. And this is something that is very confusing for a lot of people. Do amino acids help with body composition? Do they help with performance? Probably not, particularly if you're eating in an intelligent manner, like you were talking about, 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day or more, probably renders amino acid supplementation rather pointless outside of a few niche circumstances. And they're not the circumstances that people will typically talk about. For instance, if I bring this up and I don't give further information, people will typically say, okay, well then I'm going to take it fasted because it's going to prevent lean muscle loss, which sounds logical. But we have research, Wolf 2017 looked into this, and they actually found that it raised muscle protein breakdown over muscle protein synthesis if you took a BCAA product when you were fasted. It actually caused more muscle loss.
Wow.
And it's possible this happens because a full complement of aminos is required to repair or cause beneficial adaptations in muscle. So with the BCAAs, you're getting the three leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And maybe what's happening is you're triggering that muscle protein synthesis, but there's not a circulating amino acid pool required if you're fasted to be able to cause the repair. And maybe it's causing some issues with some increased breakdown because of it.
Hmm.
And then the other thing that's very confusing for people is the recovery aspect, because you can certainly find um, systemic reviews that will say if you take an amino acid product, we have seen that it increases recovery. And everyone's like, great, that's awesome. The problem with the research is it's unnuanced, and even those conclusions can be very deceiving. And this is one of the problems with research and not really understanding the field. And it's not surprising that people are misled by these things because it's very difficult to understand if you're not spending day in and day out studying these things. And so, what we found when we look at the recovery aspects with amino acids is that it doesn't appear that the amino acids themselves do anything. And this can be very confusing for people. It seems that it's the calories that the amino acids provide that do something. The calories
Oh,
are providing recovery benefits. Now,
that's it.
if you look at a label
Yeah,
for an amino acid product, it will say 0 calories.
right.
But if you test the amino acids, they have about 4.65 calories per gram. And so how is this possible? The reason is this is similar to the amino acid spiking issue. There's an FDA loophole that says that if you have a free-form amino acid, you don't have to list calories for it. And so if you're a supplement manufacturer, you say, hey, look, if I'm honest and I actually list the calories that this has, they're all going to go buy the one that lists 0 because they
Right.
think that they can drink as much as they want of this and there are no calories, even though it has the same calories per gram as sugar. They're going to think I can drink this other stuff and be fine. And so if you look at the studies that look at recovery for amino acids, you see one of two things. You see either that amino acids provide no benefits to recovery, or they only provide benefits to recovery when compared to a non-caloric control. And so when it's compared to an isocaloric control, they all seem to have the same results as far as recovery goes. And you could substitute straight sugar in place of the amino acids and you would get the same recovery benefits. Now, your original question was, what are situations in which these would actually make sense? And this is a very long way to get to that because you had to understand those things to understand when these would make sense.
Sure.
So, knowing that calories are probably the best things for recovery, we can likely use any kind of calorie source that we want. Knowing that other calorie sources probably provide better energy, they probably restore glycogen reserves better. These supplements probably don't make any sense when you're eating 1.6 grams of protein or more. It's actually as low as 1.1 grams according to the research. It's below the optimal amount for building muscle to negate the effects of amino acids in some studies. But so we know that they're not providing any of these benefits that we're really shooting for. But there are other supplements that you could use that would provide the benefits that you're supposed to be going for with these, maybe more energy, maybe better recovery, maybe at a cheaper price and better taste. Fast carbs, literally a Gatorade with the
Right.
same number of grams would provide more benefits than these amino acid supplements are doing. So in 99% of the situations where people are like, well, I'm going to take an amino acid supplement, it probably makes more sense to take a Gatorade.
Hmm.
However, there are some situations in which an amino acid product may make sense. And in those situations, I would always recommend an essential amino acid supplement rather than BCAAs, which covers the 8 essential or 9 essential amino acids rather than the just the BCAAs.
Right. Would
And
would
so
you yeah, would you say someone who is maybe vegetarian or vegan who maybe isn't getting that adequate uh leucine, valine, and isoleucine amount within their diet, would they be someone that who could possibly take a supplement like this?
possibly the thing is, again, excuse me, if they get to 1.6 grams, then they don't need to anyways, because you're getting past that point where the discrepancy in the amino acid profiles, anything that is lost in one food source is likely picked up in another, unless you're eating just the exact same foods. And they even have research on like a vegan diet. If you can get that protein amount, you're completely fine. You don't have to do the supplementation. If you're below that, yes, you're right. It could make some distinct difference. And even then, it might just require supplementing leucine alone may give the benefit that you're looking for there.
Yeah.
But the main instance that I would really look into it and like I said, this is where I would use an EAA over a BCAA. But if you are doing single day multi-event scenarios, like a CrossFit competition where you have multiple events in one day,
Yeah.
if you're doing, like cycling, or maybe you're doing a two-a-day training where you train in the morning and train in the evening. Typically, if you're doing a single day training, your muscle glycogen reserves and all those other things are being restored normally through just your standard eating patterns. If you're training multiple times in one day, or you're doing extended endurance work, like you're doing a triathlon or an Ironman,
Hmm.
um, you will likely be able to benefit from a combination of carbs and maybe amino acids. And so in those scenarios, it actually may make sense to take those during your training when you have extended training bouts. Outside of those two situations, the one that you brought up, and then in a situation like a single day multi-event scenario or very extended training sessions, such as endurance, it probably doesn't make any sense to take. And that's where Stu's idea of you're in a pool and you're dumping water on yourself makes a whole lot of sense, because if you're already getting it through your diet and your body is not lacking anything, and adding more on top of it is doing literally nothing other
Right.
than adding in these calories that you didn't know that you were getting in the first
Yeah,
place.
I did not know about that. So that is a
Yeah.
good tip for sure. Okay, thanks for clearing that up. I haven't taken them for years, but I remember, like, I have a YouTube channel, of course, lots of
Mhm.
our listeners follow the workouts there. And I used to say all the time, um, grab your BCAAs and let's move daily. And now for the last 4 years, I haven't said that, but early on in my YouTube world, I did. So if you're
Well, that
listening, I don't really say that much anymore.
that shows that you're a good coach, right? I
Yeah,
mean, there's if you aren't learning based on the new information that's coming out, you're not a good coach. And there is not a single person that has ever, or a source of information in general, there's not a single person that has ever done this for an extended period of time and hasn't changed their mind about something.
yeah.
And so, just because somebody has an alteration to their recommendations, I mean, I think that that's usually a sign that they're credible.
That's true. And that you're a constant learner. And there's just
Mhm.
I love that there's so many studies that we have access to now, and so many ways to learn. So it's fantastic.
Mhm.
Let's jump from protein supplements into creatine. We did have Dr. Darren Candow on, and he is one of the Canada's lead researchers on creatine. But I would love to hear. So we had sort of the deep dive into what it is and
Mhm.
how it functions within the body. I would love to hear who you think it's for, and possibly how to benefit from using something like that as a supplement. Like, how do we get the most out of that supplement? What's the protocol maybe that we should be following? Duration. A lot of people ask if they should cycle it on and off. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on creatine monohydrate.
Sure. Let's first talk about its benefits and who it's for, and then we can go over dosing protocols to get the most out of it. Um, who it's for is literally everybody.
Yeah.
Whether you weight train or not, whether you're 18 or 118, it's probably a good supplement to take. I mean, there's only a few people that I can think of that I would say not to take it. I mean, if you're allergic to it, if you have kidney or liver disease, if you have asthma, or if you have some autoimmune disorders or immune dysfunctions. And even the asthma one is a little bit of a gray area. We don't have as much research in people with asthma, so it's kind of a medical recommendation to be wary. Um, and whether or not you actually have an issue with it is a little bit of a debate, because I know a lot of people with asthma that do take it and they're fine. But outside of those cases, I think that literally everybody should be taking it, even if you don't weight train. There are just too many benefits to it. I mean, not only does it increase high intensity exercise, it'll help increase lean body mass, which is extremely important, particularly for an aging population. It is super beneficial for bone health. Bone is a metabolically active tissue that also uses ATP. And you had mentioned that you had gone over with Dr. Darren Candow what the mechanisms are. And so, people that have listened to that will understand that it helps to rapidly replenish and produce ATP. It helps with brain health, and it has been shown to increase brain creatine stores, phosphocreatine stores by up to 10%. It improves heat tolerance, and so it actually makes you resistant to dehydration and cramping, which is one of those I would say common myths that come out about it, where people will say, "Oh, I'm worried about taking creatine because of cramping and everything like that." And
Yes.
they've done multiple studies on this, and one that I can remember off the top of my head was Georgia D1 football, 2 days in the heat. And they gave these athletes who are sweating immensely, they're putting themselves through the ringer every day. And those that were given creatine had much lower levels of cramping, much lower levels of dehydration, greater performance, and lower overall levels of injury. And so people get confused about this because, this pulls water intramuscularly, right? And I think that that's something that a lot of people understand, and they say, "Oh, I'm a little bit worried about bloating," but this isn't interstitial fluids. It's not outside the muscle. And so, if anything, it gives you a little bit more of an impressive physique.
Right.
And so, the way that I like to term that is that, in the 1980s, we used to have different physique goals. And we were kind of going for that crack model booty, but now we're going for the peach booty. And this helps with the peach booty. And so this can be a really good thing to help explain it in this way. So more people might be willing to try it because you understand that this just amplifies the benefits that you have to your lean muscle. It doesn't make them watery or make you bloated. And so knowing that we have all of these different benefits, how do we best take it? 3 to 10 grams, creatine monohydrate, micronized probably helps if you get a little bit of GI distress from creatine itself. And for most women, and this is not gender specific, this is just body weight specific and lean muscle mass specific in particular, 3 grams is probably
Yeah.
most of what's necessary for the majority of benefits of creatine. Now, you can argue to go higher to get some more of the brain benefits, but particularly if you're concerned about feeling a little bit bloated or retaining a little bit more water or just want to lean into the supplement a little bit to see how you like it first, 3 grams daily, perfectly fine. And you'll get benefits from it.
That's right. That
Um,
saturates the muscles at that 3 grams, right?
mhm. If you're significantly muscular, and I usually say, when people with body compositions more closer to men at like 180 pounds or higher, that's when you start to go up to the 5 grams or higher for some of those benefits. So one of the issues that I believe that many women will discuss about this, and they'll say, "Oh, I was getting some GI distress." Well, you're just taking too much because, creatine will still work the same way for you, but it's just like dosing medications for like painkillers or something like that. You don't necessarily need the same amount that a 230-pound man would need. And so the issue isn't that it doesn't work for you. It's that supplement companies have been so men-centric for so long, we're essentially stupid. And so we don't give that nuance that people need to actually benefit from it and not feel some of those side effects. And I feel that if you have issues where you're like, I'm just ultra sensitive to this, I would really like the benefits, what should I do? Well, one, get them micronized. Two, you can split your dosing into multiple doses in a day. So if you're doing 3 grams, do 1.5 twice per day. You're going to get the exact same benefits, but it may be a little bit easier on your stomach.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I oscillate between maybe wanting to take more. I do 5 grams and have for the past 3 years, maybe now. And when I hear some of these brain health benefits and look at some of the studies, I know that Dr. Darren Candow's on 9 grams a day himself. And yeah, you kind of wonder. I think maybe I'll just wait and see if that more studies come out where it
Hmm.
really is beneficial to add that extra dose and ensure that it can impact the brain that way. But
Hmm.
yeah, what do you take?
I take 10, but I'm
Okay,
230 pounds. I just
right.
look light on camera. And so I take 10, but that was one of the things that I was
Yeah,
talking about in the beginning,
yeah,
where the majority of the benefits will come at those lower, more typical doses, the 3 to 5 grams dosing range.
yeah, yeah.
You're right, and I had mentioned it earlier, and you had said Darren had mentioned it, that some of the brain benefits may come at higher levels. But I would never tell a person that hasn't taken it before to start at those higher
Well,
levels.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, and so you saying that you're on 5 and you're feeling good, that's perfectly fine. You're not dosing wrong at all. You know exactly what you're doing. You've tried it before. This is an introductory type thing. Start at 3, particularly if you're under 170 pounds. Start at 3 grams,
yeah,
unless you're very muscular. under 170 pounds. Some CrossFitters, my wife came to mind when I said that, and I was like, she should have five.
Yeah.
But she was an Olympic weightlifter and regionals qualifying CrossFit competitor at like 155 pounds.
Yeah. Wow.
So the dosage will vary, but the good thing is you can get benefits at the lower dosages, and it can be a good way to lean into this if you've never tried it before. Stay away from a loading phase. It's completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
There's no reason to cycle. You don't need to go on off. This was never shown anywhere in the research. It was literally something that came out in the 90s. They started putting it down on supplement bottles, and it just never went away.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of cycling things doesn't really make any sense.
No.
If you look at the research, you will find research that suggests that loading doses will saturate you faster because they will. However, you're probably going to be at 99% muscle saturation in like 3 weeks or so, anyways. And so, what is that extra week or week and a half going to get you? You're probably going to get like 5 extra reps in the gym, which is not going to translate to any difference in progress, but you're probably going to feel pretty bloated because you're taking 20 grams at one time. So,
Right.
understanding that there's no reason to cycle, there doesn't really appear to be a reason to load, because the only reason to load would be if we need to take advantage of that extra time and we're going off of it every 4 or 8 weeks. Then that extra week of progress could make sense over the years. But since there's no reason to ever go off, it doesn't make any sense.
To get into the nitty gritty of this, protein powder. So a lot of us then are taking these supplements. We're taking creatine, we're taking protein powder, and we might feel more gassy, more bloated. Um, I like what you said about the creatine. I don't know that it's that for me. I think it's more the protein powder, because sometimes when I travel, if I don't take the supplements, it seems to go away. So what about is it the nitric oxide within protein powder? What is causing sort of that abdominal discomfort or the gas? Is it the creatine? Is it the protein? Is it a combination? Is it
It
neither? Is it the added fiber that I'm eating? What's your thoughts on that?
it's probably not the creatine. It could very
Yeah,
well be the protein.
I think
The
so.
question for me is, which protein are you taking? And that can give me some indicators on whether or not that's something that I would recommend you modifying to help address this issue.
So what
Um,
might be in a protein powder that could cause that? What should we be looking for then?
it could be higher levels of lactose, and it could be some of the other constituents like casein protein and blended protein comes to mind. Casein itself is probably very difficult for a decent portion of the population to digest very readily. And so if you have a blended protein where it has whey plus casein, that casein content may be what's messing with you a good bit. And so when people come to me and they tell me that they have these issues, one of the things that I would recommend is this is where it may make sense to look specifically for a whey protein isolate, because the whey protein isolate removes some of those, um, it removes some of the sugars that are in the protein powders that might cause a little bit of GI distress. Now, keep in mind that this GI distress it's not a health problem.
Right.
It's just some gas. It's not,
Yeah.
there's no pathology going on, so don't worry about it. If you're taking it, you're like, I'm at a tolerable level and I don't really worry about this. It's fine. If you are taking it and it's giving you some issues, that's where something like a whey protein isolate might make sense, because that isolation process itself removes some of those sugars. It removes virtually all of the lactose. And so anybody that even has the slightest issue with digesting dairy would be completely fine, likely on a whey protein isolate. And
Hmm.
I'm lactose intolerant myself, and I can take a whey protein isolate just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would
Um,
look into that first. The other thing that I would look at that would be rare, because it's not really gas that we're talking about, but there are two different isolation processes that proteins use. They use something called cross-flow microfiltered or ion exchange. And so the cheaper ion exchange is used because it will save the company money, but it produces a different level of immunoglobulins in the product, and it puts out a higher ratio of beta lactoglobulin. Now, this is really just a fancy way of saying beta lactoglobulin is an allergen in some people. And if you take a protein powder and you're like, man, that really wrecks me, I feel really bad on it, even if you start to have some allergy signs, it may not be a protein powder itself that's the problem. It may be the isolation process, and then switching to a cross-flow microfiltered one could solve that entirely. So this is a little bit off of your question, but some people maybe kind of combining the two where they're having GI distress, and it could be a partial allergic reaction to the isolation that they're using.
Another good reason to read your labels for sure. Let's talk about collagen. I have not taken collagen for my whole life until I did a coaching call on it. I did one recently where I looked at a bunch of different studies on, what collagen does, right? What does
Mhm.
it say it does? Is it true? Let's look at studies and see what the data has to say. And one of the things that I learned within it is that I mentioned this earlier that it is very low in leucine, and so if you're taking collagen, you certainly shouldn't be thinking about that as your protein source, right? That is just something in addition to your specific amount that you need throughout the day. But what I did see within it is that it can be beneficial for things like our cartilage, our ligaments and joints, that connective tissue between our joints. And possibly, again, there was a lot of data, but it was always more studies need to be done. That's kind of what I concluded. And so I took it for a month, and I know that's not long enough, but then I thought, is this worth it? Is it worth all of the hype? Is it worth my money? And then I went off it and thought, I don't think so. But I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts on collagen.
So this is one of those funny things because you're going to speak with if you speak with a dozen different people that specialize in supplements, you'll probably get a dozen different answers. And I can tell you right now that I kind of side with Stu Phillips on this one. He and I have talked about this, and we kind of have the same ideas here. So the issue there's a variety of issues with collagen protein supplementation. We talked about the leucine deficiency, and I mean even if you're using 30 grams, like high doses of collagen protein, it is not stimulating muscle protein synthesis like other proteins are. And so it appears that even to remotely get to the muscle protein synthesis levels that you would like to get to, you would be taking in an exorbitant amount of calories just to do it because you're going to have to offset the fact that it's amino acid deficient. And so now you're cutting into actual food that you could be eating. And if we're, on a cut, if we're trying to maintain our figure, do we really want to not be able to eat that, that 90 calories of chocolate that makes our day seem just a little bit brighter just to fit collagen in play? And I would argue that we probably wouldn't.
Mhm.
The issue with the studies about the benefits is there is mostly subjective measures being used, which is a problem one. And so they'll give people the supplement and they'll say, do your joints feel better? Or they'll say, is your skin looking better? And they'll be like, yes or no. And so the subjective nature of it is really problematic. Now, they're not all subjective, but in the better objective studies that we have, collagen peptide supplementation does not seem to increase connective tissue synthesis. And that's not a good sign. And so, does it have a mechanism for working? Yes, it does. I mean, it makes sense why it could work. We're not seeing it being replicated in the research, and particularly in some of the better research, we're not seeing that connective tissue synthesis actually being improved in the way that we want. So it's difficult to reconcile the human trials that show improvements in skin appearance, elasticity, and joint pain, where it's subjective experience.
Mhm.
And so we've got one of two things going on. Either the placebo effect is real, and it is very real, or we don't know the right mechanism and we're looking at the wrong thing. But you would think that if improving joints would be part of it, then connective tissue synthesis should be one of the main mechanisms by which it would work. And so at this stage, and I talk about collagen protein literally all the time with my clients because this is a big thing that gets pushed around and people want better skin and you want better feeling joints. We're not 20 years old anymore where we could fall off the roof of a house and the next day we're completely fine. If we sleep wrong, we're out of commission for a week.
Hmm.
And so knowing that this would be beneficial would be a great thing. We're just not there yet with the data. I'm
Yeah.
skeptical that
Yeah.
it is as effective as it was originally claimed when all we had were these subjective studies, because as we get these more objective studies, and I'm happy to share with this with anybody if they would like, but the more objective studies that we get, the less impressive it seems. And so at this stage, my recommendation is typically if you have discretionary calories in your diet and you want to put them towards collagen, sure, knock yourself out. If you're not hitting your protein needs, if this is creating a problem where you're now putting yourself in a calorie allotment that is not advantageous for you, either you're now gaining weight where you didn't want to gain weight, or you're constantly starving because this is replacing, fruits and veggies or lean proteins that could be satiating you, it's probably not the right choice. And so like I said, you're going to talk to different professionals and they'll all have different opinions on this. So I'm happy to share the studies. But right now, if somebody is telling you, I'm sure that this is going to be very beneficial for you, ask them for the studies that are objective in nature, that show that actual beneficial changes are being made and they're not, questionnaires or somebody that's just evaluating skin and I mean, is the person experiencing better skin because they want to believe that they're experiencing better skin? Are they experiencing better skin because they're now enrolled in a study and they're, taking health seriously and they're finally eating fruits and veggies and they're drinking water for the first time? And, like what is going on that's causing this to look better?
Well, exactly. Like there's so
You
many
know?
other factors that when people shift something, I feel like that's why it's challenging, like especially if it's a subjective study. How do you say it's not all the other things that you are doing that is also helping, right? So anyway, I'm glad that I asked you that because I agree with that opinion. And I really liked what you said about how you want to maximize for your other targets as well. So if you have a target for fat loss and the collagen one scoop is adding an additional 100 to 150 calories, do you have room for that? If you do, go for it. If you don't, cut it
This
out,
is this is like the BCAAs. If you really
Yeah,
like the taste of it, one, you could get
sure.
like a Mio or something like that. But
Yeah.
two, if you're just dead set on those BCAAs, do you have the
Yeah.
calorie allotment for it?
Yeah. Actually, when I was dieting down, I competed back in 2010. And yeah, that was like the treat, right? The BCAAs, cherry
I
lime,
know.
BCAAs. Oh, yum. I
And it
remember.
and it and it probably was good in some of those situations because it gave you some calories that you probably needed and you kept
Yeah.
taking your calories down because you were competing,
That's right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. But for the lion's share of us, not necessary. That's yeah, I'm in the same boat. I agree. Let's change this conversation quickly here just to talk about plateaus. There are so many of us who have possibly been in the fitness arena for a while. Maybe you have been dieting down and trying to attain a goal, a fat loss goal or a body composition goal, and you feel like all of a sudden things have just slowed and maybe stopped completely. What advice would you give one of your clients who's in that position? And I want to think specifically, perhaps, of a woman who might be in this position. What would you say to her? What would be your first order of business if someone were to say, "Hey, help me. I'm at a plateau. What should I do?"
Well, plateaus come in two forms. I mean, nutrition and fitness. And typically when we're talking about losing weight in the situation that you presented, it's mostly a nutrition type question. Now, the first thing to understand is that losing weight comes down to energy balance. And so the number of calories that we eat is paramount of importance. If you are eating less calories than you're burning, then you're going to lose weight. If you're eating more calories than you're burning, you're going to gain weight. So first thing is we have to understand that. And the average resting metabolic rate for a sedentary person is probably a lot lower than what many people think. I mean, according to the research for men, it's around 1,700 calories per day, and for women, it's about 1,400. Now,
Yeah.
this is before your daily movement. But, people will always say, oh, I'm at 1,200 calories, therefore I'm entering starvation mode, or therefore, it's not possible that I could be that low. But, if you are an average woman and your daily, RMR is like 1450 and maybe you only get 2 or 3,000 steps per day, well, maybe your daily, maintenance levels at like 1,700 calories. Maybe it's not that high. And so a smart cut would be something between 250 and 500 calories. So there you are. That's 1,200 calories right there. So just because you're at that 1,200 calorie um, mark doesn't mean that that's necessarily unnecessary. And so I want to point that out because people will immediately start to think, well, maybe I'm in starvation mode. But very low calorie diet research has debunked starvation mode. There's literally no situation that you can be in where your metabolism will say, okay, well, I'm not getting enough calories, therefore I'm just going to somehow prevent the laws of thermodynamics from working. You're never going to see somebody in like a concentration camp who is of a moderate body weight. Like it doesn't happen because it can't happen.
But people love to use that.
I
They
know they
love to
do.
say that. Like they really do love it. I'm not losing weight because I'm in starvation mode. I must be.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'm like, no,
There's no such thing as starvation mode, but there is such a thing as metabolic adaptation.
that's right.
And so the idea behind starvation mode is that your body drops your resting metabolic rate so low that no matter how low you go in your calories, you can't get into that calorie deficit, that energy balance part of the equation we talked about initially. But if you actually look at these studies that are looking at people and how much RMR drops compared to predictive equations. And what I mean by that is, say that you're 175 pounds when you start out and you get down to 145 pounds. Well, if you look at yourself compared to somebody that has similar genetics and a similar body composition at 145 pounds, your resting metabolic rate might be lower than they had if they had never lost that weight. Yours is probably depressed a little bit from the fat loss process. But when
Mhm.
you look at the research, it's only about 5 to 25 calories per day. So is a fourth of a fun size Snickers bar stopping you from losing weight at the most? I would argue
Right.
probably not.
No.
And I
Yeah.
mean, even in the most extreme versions of dieting, the Minnesota starvation experiment that is very famous, people take looks at this all the time from the 50s. Um, the individuals lost nearly 25% of their entire body weight over a 5 month period. And when you look at that depression, rather than the 5 to 25 that is probably realistic for you as a listener who's trying to lose body fat, it was between 75 and 100 kilocalories per day. So one fun size Snickers bar when you take into account the amount of weight lost. And so even in situations where people are losing 150 pounds or more, the resting metabolic rate, you're not metabolically damaged. So that's a good thing. That's really important to understand because if we know what it's not, then we can start to look into what it is and then figure out how to make adjustments to actually continue moving towards our goals. And so there are two things that happen with metabolic adaptation that are going to be really important to understand. Two main things that your body does to prevent further weight loss. Because whether or not we know that we're losing weight to actually improve our health, our body doesn't know that. Our body is, biologically evolved to prevent weight loss because, in caveman times, if you're losing weight, that's a bad thing. You don't know when your next meal is going to come. And so we have some very real systems in our body to prevent weight loss. Going in the other direction, some people have systems to prevent them from really gaining significant amounts of weight. They feel nauseous, they start to move a lot. I mean, you see me kind of moving around a bit because I'm an animated person, but it also helps with my maintaining body weight. And it's just one of the things that my body does. For a lot of people, that doesn't happen. So
Mm.
we have this very unilateral system that tends to highly prevent weight loss, but tends to let us gain a bit of weight. And for some people, lets you gain a lot of weight without kicking in. And so the two systems or the two main mechanisms for preventing the weight loss, one, it drops something called NEAT, which is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's a fancy way to say all of the movement that you do that is outside of dedicated exercise. So you're walking, you're fidgeting, everything that you do at work. And believe it or not, this can be one of the biggest influencers on your energy balance in an entire day. I mean, it can range from a few hundred calories to over 2,000 calories per day in extremely active individuals. Now, I'm not saying the person that gets up and walks for a couple hours a day. What I'm saying is, a 2,000 calorie NEAT for a day would be something like an agricultural job.
Hmm.
But that just goes to show how significant this is.
Hmm.
And so, since this is one of the main mechanisms that our body uses to prevent us from continuing to lose weight, what we end up seeing is that our natural movements throughout the day tend to decrease and decrease and decrease. And this is why coaches and scientists have started telling people to monitor their step count,
Yeah.
because step count is one of the only proxies of NEAT that we can actually take with any significant or any agreeable margin of error. We can actually target step count and get pretty relatively accurate numbers as we monitor it. And so just because you don't hit that, everybody says something like 10,000 steps per day, doesn't mean that you shouldn't monitor your NEAT, your step count. Because what you might find is you might start losing weight. You start at that 175-pound mark, you want to get down to 145 pounds. At 175 pounds, maybe you're getting 6,000 steps. Then all of a sudden at 155 pounds, you realize you're getting 4,000 steps. And now it's becoming significantly harder to lose more weight. Well, a big reason is right there. And if
Hmm.
you know that this is happening and you have a gauge to be able to tell you how much it's happening, that means you can do a lot to be able to counterbalance this. And that's a wonderful thing. This is something that you can actively keep your eye on and then change. It is something that's within your control. You can't control how much you lose, how much weight you lose. You can't control how much muscle you build if you want to build lean muscle. You can't control how much, bone density that you have. But you can control step count for a large
Yeah, you
extent.
can.
You
Yeah,
can
you
control
can.
you can control how much water you drink. You can
Yeah.
control relatively what you put in your mouth. So in these situations where you're trying to take control of your life, you're trying to improve your health, take control of every single thing that you can take control of,
Yeah.
because you're going to want to have that ability to make these changes to prevent yourself from getting frustrated. And so knee dropping is one of the major things that happens. The other major thing that happens is hunger drive ramps up. And this is those changes that we talk about with, leptin and ghrelin balance shifting. But when we start to lose weight, one of the things that our body does is it starts to tell us, hey, I want you to eat a little bit because we're losing weight. We need to keep that weight up. We need to prevent this loss because we're sliding into a territory where maybe I think that we're starving to death. And what we find is that in the beginning of weight loss endeavors, people are relatively adherent and consistent with a diet. And they're consistent and adherent because they're really motivated in the beginning. Hey, this is something new. It's fun. I finally made the steps to do this. I'm going to do this. This is going to be great. And then the months go on, and then it seems not as fun as it once did. Even though we're seeing progress, it's just the doldrums of getting through it are really difficult. And then on top of that decrease in motivation, which is inevitable, and if you expect it, you can say, okay, I went from very high motivation to what is a normal expected amount of motivation, and I can push through this because I have goals. On top of that, getting hit with more hunger than what you were dealing with before becomes a really bad recipe for cheating on your nutrition
Hmm.
without even noticing it. And this is where you start to take bites of the kids' food that you're preparing, or you just take a handful of trail mix, or you just, get a couple of those, M&Ms or whatever it is. And it's not to say that there isn't room for some of this discretionary calorie intake. What it is to say is if we're not tracking this, it tends to become a far bigger influencer than what we would think when we're trying to look back. If you're keeping detailed notes on what's going on here, it can be a very telling thing and probably very surprising for a lot of people. And that goes into the four main things that I would really look for to see first whether or not you're actually stalled. And the first thing that I would look for first is, you know, do you actually have an accurate calorie count of what you're
Hmm.
taking in? Because if you're eyeballing, the amount of servings that you're doing or the amount of food that you're eating, you can't actually tell whether or not you're stalled. Are you stalled or are you just pushing that energy balance equation into maintenance or above maintenance? And that could be your answer right there. So are you eating more calories than you think you are? You may be overestimating your activity. And this is where keeping track of something like NEAT is a good proxy, keeping track of your step count. And please, for the love of God, don't use the calorie burning trackers from those, the watches, the Aura rings, all of those things. The calorie numbers that those turn out on average are off by 30 to 40% and can be off by 92%.
Yeah, that's right. They're way overestimated. And I know people ask me all the time, what's the calorie count out for this workout? I'm like, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I know they want a gauge, but yes, definitely a huge margin of error on trackers.
it's a massive margin of error. And if you want to track something, if you want a gauge of how well your exercise is going, you can do different things. You don't
Yeah.
use this. You can use something else. So if you're gonna go for a run for 30 minutes, track your distance. Can you go a little bit farther each time? If you're going to be doing it on a treadmill, track your intensity. It'll say 3 miles per hour. Can you do 3.2 next time? Or whatever it is. If you are staying at a same, if you're staying at the same intensity, can you increase the time that you go? There are different things that you can monitor to be able to adjust. The calorie burn is just not one of them because these trackers don't work. And the problem with these trackers is they're using something called heart rate variability.
Mhm.
But heart rate variability is not a gauge of calories burned. The only way to really do that is something called indirect calorimetry, and you would have to have a breathing mask attached to you to be able to tell that. So unless you're doing indirect calorimetry, you're not getting an accurate calorie burn. And what's really interesting is that first thing that I talked about, the inaccurate calorie tracking. If you are eating out at restaurants or you're eating out where other people prepare food often, these two things can combine for more calories in a day of error than you should be eating in the entire day.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
mean, if you look at the calorie content that is on a menu, on average, they're off by 20%. In some cases in the research, the discrepancy has been as high as 200%. So there are 200% more calories than what is given on a restaurant menu. And if you add in side dishes, it can be up to 250%. And so you've just had a meal that you think is 600 calories, but it's really 1500. And so add that in and then try to subtract your daily calorie burn from your activity tracker. And all of a sudden you're eating 2,500 more calories than you should be eating for a day. And so it's really important that if this is something that is a priority for you, cooking your own food is a must. Because when a restaurant does it, there's not a guy in the back that is taking a food scale and he's saying, okay, well, this has to be 8 ounces of chicken every time. There's nobody that's doing that. There's nobody that's saying, okay, well, I need 15 grams of butter. They're eyeballing it and they're
Right.
using, the cutlets that they get, and they vary and they can vary dramatically between different ones. And so, you're going to be getting a different amount of calories each time. So I will typically tell people if you're doing macros and you're eating out, you should probably add at least 20% of calories to whatever is on the menu to even remotely get in the neighborhood where you probably should be. Now, this isn't a recommendation to eat out often, but it is to point out, look, if you have a job where you're traveling, or if you have the ability to eat at home, I mean, if you have that job where you're traveling, you're going to run into this error, and that could be your issue right there. If you have the ability to
Yeah.
eat at home or prep food and bring it with you, certainly do that if you're experiencing this supposed stall that you think you are. Because if all of a sudden you change your foods to prepared foods that you have that you're actually weighing, you might start progressing again. And you could be like, oh, it wasn't that my calorie counts were wrong or the macros that I were doing was wrong. It's that I was getting far more than I thought I was. And this is the only way to really be able to tell that that's happening. And so these two things with calories are probably the most important thing. The other thing that you have to understand is that weight loss and fat loss are different things. And so just because you're stalled on weight loss doesn't mean that you're actually stalled on fat loss, particularly if you're brand new to training, if you were significantly obese when you started, if you're coming back from a significant layoff from training, maybe you got injured or maybe you went to med school or something that prevented you from training for a long period of time. Um, you know, you can see variance in weight even when you're still losing body fat. And so it takes longer periods of time than 1 or 2 weeks to really tell if you're moving in the right direction. And with women, you also have your menstrual cycle in play. And so comparing every 4 weeks makes a lot more sense than comparing every 2 weeks, because
Hmm.
every 2 weeks you might be bloated, and you might be bloated to a different extent depending on how you react to your cycle. And so it's important to understand that there's a difference between weight loss and fat loss, because you may be the same weight because maybe you just had more sodium in your diet within the last 48 hours. Maybe you were a little bit more off plan in the last 48 hours and you're holding some more water. Maybe your cycle is causing you to hold some more water. Maybe you've added some muscle over this period, which is a good thing, but muscle weighs something. And so, you were 165 pounds 3 weeks ago. Maybe you added a pound of muscle and you're relatively the same on your scale, with the variance in water weight and food weight in your system and everything like that. And so having minor stalls throughout the process is expected. And the
Hmm.
leaner that you get, the more that it's going to happen, because
Yeah.
the more body fat that you have, the more room you have for relative error and you'll still progress. If you start to
Right.
clean up your diet, you're going to progress pretty quickly in the beginning.
Yeah.
And particularly in that first month, you're going to lose significant amounts of muscle glycogen. You're going to lose significant amounts of body water that goes with that. As you start to cut down on your daily carb intake, because the reality is we probably eat too many carbs. And I'm not saying that carbs are the villain. What I'm saying is in the average Western diet, we probably eat an overabundance.
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah,
and
for sure.
so and so, when we start to go into a diet and we start to lose body fat, one of the first things that we cut out is some of the added sugars and some of
Hmm.
those, you know. And so when you do that, your skeletal muscle glycogen stores start to dip a little bit. And with that goes some water. And so that's why in the first month when you're on a diet, you'll often see accelerated weight loss. And this is why people get in love with keto. And I'm not a keto advocate for an otherwise healthy person. But the reason that people believe that keto works better, even though all the research shows that it doesn't, if you equate protein and calories, a standard continuous diet that's probably healthier for you will work just as well for fat loss. It does not work just as well for weight loss within that first month. And it doesn't work as well for weight loss in that first month because you are losing significant amounts of water and muscle glycogen on keto that you're not losing on a standard continuous diet. But in the eyes of a person that hasn't really heard this explanation before, they'll look at the scale and they'll be like, holy shit, keto
Oh, yeah,
really
they're thrilled.
works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is so motivating. And then you tell all of your friends that keto works super well. Check back with that same person in 6 months. All of a sudden keto doesn't work quite so well. It doesn't work nearly as well as it used to work. But you always hear these people talking about how wonderful it is in the first couple months because they're experiencing the weight loss that they don't really understand isn't the fat loss that they think it is.
Hmm. We always encourage our members to ensure that they are testing progress in other ways as well, right? So, I mean, you can grab some calipers. They're relatively inexpensive. You can get them off Amazon to test and have a friend or a partner help you test your body fat. You can do a waist to hip ratio measurement. We can test progress in terms of, you know, could you do your push-ups from your knees and now are you doing them from your toes, right? Can you sustain longer workouts with added energy, right? Can you run further? Can you jump higher? So I think it's important to make sure that you are looking at other elements because part of our goal, hopefully, aside from just aesthetics and body composition shift, which is important, is also longevity, is also feeling good about ourselves. And sometimes we just need that home run, right? We need to see that things are moving in the right direction. And if it's not happening necessarily on the scale, then yes, including some of these awesome tips that Dr. Allen just gave us, I think is super important. But also don't forget to just look at some of these other factors that could be shifting and changing as well and celebrate those because I think sometimes we just think the scale is king and it shouldn't necessarily be. It is important, I think, because it is an indicator, right? But these other elements are also important, especially if you're feeling better, if you're having more energy, if you're increasing lean muscle tissue. These things matter most to me.
I
Anyway,
think I'm actually very happy of where the conversation is going
Yeah.
um, with general fitness outlets these days. And
Yeah.
most of them are talking about really the benefits of building lean muscle and aging. And I think that this was one of those um, not faux pas, but one of those things that we really didn't talk about in women's health for decades. It was always a passé thing to tell women you need to build some lean muscle.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
But these are the type of other signs of success that you're getting at that tend to be far more important than anything as weight loss on the scale. I mean, if you want to talk about quality of life, if you want to talk about reducing injury risk, if you want to talk about becoming more metabolically thrifty, I mean, being able to control blood glucose and those types of things better, lean muscle is where it's at.
Hmm.
And so finding value in some of these um, measurable outcomes beyond the scale is a very important thing. And what I'm getting at here is something like performance outcomes. Because if you're getting in and you're starting to weight train and you're using progressive overload and you're adding more weight or more reps or more sets over time, there is no way that you continue to increase that without adding lean muscle. And so that lean muscle is going to essentially be one of the best signs of better quality of life for the rest of your life. And
Hmm.
if you can fall in love with performance increases in the gym, you've made it right there. All of a sudden, your entire fitness journey becomes a lot easier. And I'm not saying that you have to love going to the gym. It would be nice if you loved going to the gym, and that's the ultimate goal if it's possible. Intrinsic motivation is the number one thing that we want. But as an example, Muhammad Ali has this famous quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but I'll get out the point. He used to say that he hated every second of training, but he loved winning. And so you don't have to love going to the gym. It would be great if you did, and hopefully you build to that point because that makes life a lot easier. But finding what you do love about the experience, about the journey is key. And if you can start to enjoy things like seeing the progress that you make in the gym, which translates to maybe you can pick up your kid, maybe you can take your big dog for a walk where it used to be scary, maybe you can, carry groceries a little bit more easily, maybe you can go on that hike that you didn't think that you used to be able to go on. These are invaluable. And they're the type of things that people don't think about because they get so focused on the scale that they don't realize the actual quality of life benefits that this journey brings. And the way that you brought this up as those other signs of success was absolutely beautiful because this is what people really need to start focusing on. I mean, hitting a plateau is frustrating, right? This is the thing that will keep you going for the rest of your life. Whether or not you know how to deal with a plateau, those other signs of success are by far the most important thing that you can start to focus on if you really want to make a lifestyle change for the rest of your life.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. Love it. Love all of it. Wow, this was so informative. I think we have learned a lot about supplements. So thank you for all of your insight into that. If you're thinking about supplementing, make sure you go back and re-listen to some of the tips that Alan gave us in order to choose the right supplement for yourself. And then, of course, talking about plateaus and how they happen to all of us, but how really dialing in that precision when it comes to looking at how much you're eating and how much you're burning is going to be the ticket to help you reach your targets. Where can people work with you? Where can they find you on social? Let us know your handles and different things like that.
You can go to mauiathletics.com and check out everything there. I've got a lot of research-based blog articles there that can be very beneficial for you for free. You can slide down to the bottom. All of my social media links are there, or you can reach out directly to me at Instagram at Dr. Allan Bacon. That's DRALLAN Bacon, and I'm more than happy to help out where I can.
So good. Thank you so much. I'll make sure I post all of those in the show notes below, so make sure you check that out. Well, thanks again for listening. As always, go move daily in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition, and we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.